Well guys, we sold Area 52 and today I'm going to talk about how we did it, why I did it, and then how we're going to turn this new property into a wildlife and hunting paradise. My wife and I, we have a relatively modest income. You know, we've been able to save up for a period of time. Hopefully at the end of this is going to be the return on investment that I'm really pushing for, and that's going to strive me maybe for the next property or whatever it looks like.
All right guys, here we go, October 6th, and my first hunt down to Area 52. I'm not surprised at all about that buck that I saw tonight. That's a buck that I call Shrimp. He is just a bully buck.
Into our third year of ownership, and it's kind of starting to feel like it's a finished product down here. I feel like it's the right tree. It's a really cool transition between this creek bottom area to this oak ridge right out in front of me.
Oh man, I haven't been shook up like this in a long time.
First buck down Area 52. That's that buck.
That is him.
That's that random buck that we didn't know who the heck it was. I wanted to create a water hole in a location on my farm that I thought was being underutilized. I can't help but smile right now. There's so much native browse in here.
Dude, we freaking did it. God. Oh man.
As I said, guys, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm a new farm owner, a new piece of property, one that's going to be referred to as the Homestead, and it's really special to look back through all those memories and the history that I developed on Area 52. You know, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it was hard to let that one go. You know, that's a lot of memories associated with it, but that's one of the things I'm really excited about, is that the bones are here on this property, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to create those new memories, create that new history. But before that, I want to talk about how did we get here? First and foremost, I think it always just comes down to the opportunity of just keeping an eye on the market, and then also just keeping an eye on having a lot of friends within the market. Friends like John and Gabe, that we did a little musical chairs on property, and that's something that was really important to facilitate this. But then also understanding what I was looking for. I wanted to make sure that I was finding something that was larger in size, so that was important because I could make a bigger impact on wildlife. And then also I wanted it to be a situation where it had diversity, open areas, whether that be native grasses, prairie, row crop acres, and then also the timber side of it. That's a passion of mine, managing the timber. And then last but not least is I wanted to have a certain proximity to home. You know, I spend a lot of time down here on these properties, and I want to make sure that spending time at home is also special to me, and I want to make sure I'm able to maximize that. So having those core values, also knowing that, hey, you never know what's going to come up. I was not planning on this happening, and I'm really happy to be standing here on this property today as a landowner. Another item we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about is definitely the financial side of that, because it plays a huge role in being a landowner. And one of the things I'm really proud of is I put a lot of hard work in Area 52, and I was very fortunate to have a lot of equity sitting there at the end. So I knew when the opportunity did present itself to go into that next property that I was going to have a nice little nest egg sitting there, so I could, you know, lower that monthly payment down just a little bit, which then it comes down to the side of doing a 1031 exchange. Now, if you're not familiar with that, essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking those proceeds that I made off of Area 52, rolling them directly into the homestead, and that's a tax benefit because I don't have to pay capital gains taxes on those items, which is a huge benefit when you start talking about building a lot of equity over time. And then the other side that I'm really excited about with this property is just the cash flow side of it. With rec properties, it's getting harder and harder to be able to cash flow it. There's not very many opportunities out there anymore where you have these properties that are bringing in enough income to offset what the actual payment is. That's getting fewer and farther in between. But this is a property that does have 40 acres of row crop, currently in row crop, has another 30 acres of actual CRP income, which those payments alone are gonna really help offset what it's gonna cost to just own this property. We're not talking about making enhancements, but just to own it. The financial side is really important, and I encourage everyone to have a really strong relationship with their banker, have those open conversations, because oftentimes they're gonna tell you no for a long time before they tell you yes. But being a landowner is something that I always dreamed of doing. And the land management, the land ownership, conservation, I mean, that's almost more important to me at this point in my life than the actual hunting side of it. The hunting is just a cherry on top of this whole thing. So we talked about the how, we talked about the financials, let's talk about the why. You know, what about this property would make me sell Area 52, something that's special to me? And I've always said that if I was gonna sell that farm, it would have to be the right farm. I didn't wanna compromise where I'm at. You know, I put so much blood, sweat, and tears in that property. But this is one of those farms that just has the diversity. That's the side of this that I got so excited about, that it hasn't had a ton of management for wildlife specifically. First and foremost, it has those elements of the timber and lots of edge components, which as an individual that spends a lot of time archery hunting at this point in my career, you know, the edge for a whitetail is like critical for getting those access points, and then also getting them within bow range because they're an edge animal. Pinch points, fence rows, you know, different topography components, you know, saddles, depending on where you're located. You know, those are all just different elements where, you know, whitetails want to take the path of least resistance, but also the landscape can put deer in certain locations. And if you know how to read those, specifically by looking at a map or just being able to get boots on the ground and identify them on your property, if you can understand that edge component, it's going to really lend itself to archery hunting. Diving back into the diversity of this property, I think it's so unique because it feels like it's multiple farms rolled into one. And it's got that diamond in the rough type component that I absolutely love, because I know I can bring that side of it where I can make that diversity even better than what it is. But starting on the north side of this farm, you know, it has that typical southern Iowa hardwoods, lots of white oaks, walnuts, and hickories. And to be honest with you, I could probably not do a darn thing to that section of the farm, and it's gonna be really good. You know, just little TSI projects and stuff like that. We have multiple creek bottoms that come together. We have an oak ridge on the north side of the property. We got the row crop acres. We got the warm season grasses. The topo is crazy. If you laid it flat across a map, you know, it would be, you know, substantially larger than what it is. One of the things that the previous landowners did a really good job of is that some of those acres that are a steeper slope, those are planted to native grasses, and they're a really good stand. But there's also acres, like where we're standing on this food plot, is that there's a ton of invasives. There's old pasture acres, multiflower rose, honeysuckle, and some locust trees. That's gonna really be something I'm gonna spend a ton of time trying to get back into the loop and make those where they're providing to wildlife, because you pay for every single one of them. We should try to maximize those. This property has those, and that's really gonna be a key component to bringing this all together here in the future. All right, we've spent a ton of time talking about why this farm. And now we're gonna talk about how I'm gonna bring that plan, short-term, long-term, bring this whole thing together. And it all has started back in February. We're able to get early access to this property. And the first thing that I did is I brought Axe out here and we were able to do a late inventory. Knowing we didn't have any other food on the property, there was no late season food, so that was something that we did right away. And then right after that, we started with a little bit of TSI. And to be honest with you, every single timber acre on this property is gonna have to have some level of TSI. So I know that that's gonna be a daunting task moving forward. But we started in a location that's a little pond or water hole on the property that's gonna be adjacent to a food plot that we're gonna start talking about here in a second. But we worked our way around that and tried to kill off some of the locust trees that are located there. That's one thing I'm gonna be talking about for years and years to come, but we started that process knowing that there's gonna be a ton of work. You gotta start flipping those acres somehow. But then right after that, we rolled right into creating this plot that's back behind me. You know, this farm didn't have a lot of food actually located for any times of the year, and there's some low-hanging fruit locations. And what I mean by that is that this is an open area behind me that historically was just cool season grasses, brome and fescue, and we're gonna convert that into food. And where this is located, you have a water hole on one side, timber back off to the back, and then it's a transition right up to our row crop. So it's that classic transition that we always talk about of having a green food source back in here, transitioning out to the row crop or the grain acres that are gonna be just off to the actual west of this location. So it has all those components, and in addition to being already cleared out, you know, all the work was done for me. This is former pasture acres that are here. So I'm gonna utilize that and I'm gonna convert this into probably a clover plot, brassica plot split. And I'm gonna use monster bucks multi-year and the off season is what I started this one off on, because I haven't made the decision yet. I don't know what this plot's gonna be, you know, coming into this fall. If the clover looks great, I'm gonna leave it to clover, so I wanna maximize those acres. But if there are areas that are a little thinner, maybe I wanna split the plot, it's big enough where it's close to half an acre where I could split it and go into monster bucks rut greens for this upcoming fall. I have a ton of options on this plot, and in addition to that, there's also a ton of options for tree stand locations. As I stand here, I feel like I pointed out 3 or 4 different trees that could be different winds, playing the thermal, you know, side of that as well. And I also think that I could put a blind in here at some point in time too, if I did a little bit shorter. Redneck makes those soft side blinds, which this would be a perfect location for that, to be able to tuck it in here. Even if this wasn't a food plot, this would be a good spot to hunt. And if we can put food out in front of it, it's just gonna make it even better. So as we talk about these year one food plots, with this being low hanging fruit and being an open area, let's contrast that to a completely different style plot that I'm gonna bring on and be known as the Homestead plot moving forward, where Ryan and I were out there a few weeks ago. There's gonna be a lot of work that needs to be done, but I really think that that's gonna be a really cool location that's gonna set up for a really cool rut hunt in the future. This is why we call it the Homestead right here. Just a little TLC and we're ready to move in. Essentially everything that you see on the flat top of this actual ridge itself, that this would become a clover plot specifically. But there is a walnut tree that's located really close to the cabin here, where I feel like you could work a northwest wind. We're right adjacent to really good bedding. So we're sitting really close to the bedroom, green food source that's transitioning right out to Big Ag that's right behind us off to the south. I've never actually mapped out what I envision this plot looking like, so I'm actually gonna turn on my tracker and I'm gonna walk the perimeter of what I envision this plot looking like, knowing it's not gonna be a huge plot, but I just wanna envision what that's gonna look like. All right, so I'm gonna save that track, and then the next thing I'll do is I'll go into my tools. And I'm just gonna take that area shape tool, and I'm just gonna drop pins directly on the outside of where I just laid that track, and that'll give me a really accurate measurement of how big this plot's gonna be. Something like that. All right, that's done. The big reveal, 0.2 acres. As you guys can see from that OnX tracker, that's gonna be a really small plot. And the goal of that plot isn't to put off a bunch of tonnage when it comes to food. I'm trying to create strategic locations throughout the timber where if I can get that doe to come through there that certain time of the year, nibble off some clover before she moves on with a buck following her. That's the whole idea behind what will be a kill plot in that location, where I'm not as focused on how do I get as much tonnage as I can. Don't get me wrong, you want these plots to all do really well. That's a spot where I'm gonna use monster bucks multi-year, year after year, and that'll be a clover plot. Clover is always one of my favorite food sources. It's gonna set up and do really well in that actual location. You know, we do have the cabin that's located right there, and that's gonna play into access for getting in and out. You can play with the sight lines a little bit, where I feel like we can come in from the south like really easily, but a northwest wind is gonna blow that out into the actual row crop acres, where in theory, by the time I'm hunting those locations, those row crops are gonna be gone. So I'm taking that into consideration when I'm gonna be hunting there, because I do think that that's gonna set up to be specifically a morning hunt, because that's gonna be a location where you're gonna have that cruising going over top of that actual ridge system. You have a creek just off to the north. I mean, it just sets up for rut hunting. Jumping back to where we're at today, we've able to accomplish a lot of burning down here on the property, and that was a big part that I wanted to get accomplished year one. I'm really proud of the native acres that are down here. The warm season grasses, they look really good, and we had close to 30 acres that we burned down here for the CRP side of it. And I'm a big proponent of actually leaving some refuge acres too. So we do have a few little areas that we strategically didn't burn. And with the idea that, pheasants, turkey, nesting, any type of, populations, they're gonna be able to utilize that and have that for shelter too. So the burn plan is something I'm gonna be talking about for years to come out here at the homestead. And it's not gonna be just the native grasses, it's also gonna incorporate the timber acres. To date, I haven't really done anything for burning the actual timber, but I will be making an actual burn map where I have different sections that I'm gonna burn on rotation every single year, where you don't wanna burn your entire farm all in one year, but you would like to periodically do it over stages. And if you can do it over a 3 to 4 year different span of what those burns can be, that can provide different wildlife and have that early successional growth year after year. And that can really set the stage for your long-term goals for your property of providing tonnage, and also let the fire do the work. Chainsaw and fire are a land manager's best friends. And if I can let the fire do the work so I don't have to run the chainsaw as often, that's gonna be a good goal for me to have. Well, that brings us to today. You guys are officially all caught up for all the projects we've done up to this date. As we list them out like that, that doesn't seem like a ton of hours, but I've spent a ton of time down here on the farm. Rye's spent a ton of time down here with me. I know that we've logged a lot of time. This is one of those deals that this isn't gonna be snap your fingers, it's gonna come together. And a little bit that brings me into my philosophy, or what I wanna see for my year one goals on the property, is that it's so critical, in my opinion, as a landowner, if I'm wanting to convert this into a wildlife mecca, that I need to make sure that I'm very tactful with how I take these steps over this first year, because I always want to take advantage of the growing season, take advantage of the spring, because I can see the fruits of those labor. I can see that clover plot grow. I can see, these acres regenerate, during that time. And one of the big goals that I always have is I want to make sure I'm thinking long-term, that I don't do too much at the beginning. Every time I'm down here on the property, I try to learn something. I always want to take that information, apply that to my plan, because I don't want it to be detrimental to make these short-term projects that I have to redo later on. So continuing to discuss the year one plans, first and foremost, we talked about food. We've talked about that quite a bit, how we're gonna incorporate these new plots, lay out those row crop acres to identify locations where I can bow hunt from. That really makes it a variable when it comes to late season. Setting it up for gun hunting versus archery hunting, that's a huge variable when it comes to setting up your farm. I do think that this farm could be challenging for that, and that's something I'm okay with. But then also, I wanna start that flipping process. And when I say flipping process, I'm talking about these acres that are being underutilized. You're paid for every single one of them. We wanna make sure we're maximizing them. And it's gonna be a years and years of trying to get these invasives under control on this property, specifically on the pasture acres. Probably gonna see some large equipment coming down here at some point in time where I can make that quick reset, completely rid the landscape, and then either replant those to food or replant them to green food sources, native grasses, maybe do some direct nut seeding with some acorns or something along those lines. Love the different options that I could have with that. And then last but definitely not least, because I should probably list this first, is just the fact of continuing to learn. That's gonna be critical for creating this wildlife mecca that I really think it has the opportunity to be. I think it's good already. How do I make it great? Well, we've spent a ton of time talking about year one, short-term goals, but we should probably talk about some long-term goals that I have down here on the property as well. I think first and foremost, I'm gonna continue to talk about the maximizing acres. That's something where I would love to be able to fast forward 5 years and see my work and if it's come to fruition or not. I think when it comes to the row crop acres too, identifying what is the sweet spot for this farm. As of right now, there's 40 acres of row crop. I don't know if it's gonna have 40 acres of row crop moving forward. There's some erosion issues that need to be rectified. Whether those are waterways, converting those into alfalfa fields, and even just providing a different food source in those locations. Can I convert some of those additional acres into CRP income where I could have additional cover, and I could get to the point where I'm the one planting the crop. You know, that's something that I would say that that's a personal goal of mine, is that I'm the one's putting the beans, the corn in the ground. I'm the one that's doing it. If I can do that work and I'm relying on myself, you know, I don't have any excuses for what that can look like. Next on the list would just be seeing those acres become something valuable that are being underutilized right now. And maybe that doesn't necessarily mean financial income, but maybe it means providing, you know, cover, food at different times of the year, just something different than what they are right now, because right now it's just a complete desert and they're not providing anything for wildlife. And I think that one of the things that's going to play into the next few years too is that I do think I'm going to do a select harvest of timber on this property. And the reason I don't want to do that right now is that if I do open up that canopy, what's going to fill that void is probably something invasive right now. Multiflower rose, honeysuckle. I want to make sure I get that under check. I know I'm not going to rid the landscape of it completely, but if I can get the large plants that are fruit producing under check and then follow that up with fire in continuing years, that's going to play a role in actually doing the harvest, which is going to be a nice financial kickback. There are a lot of white oaks and walnuts that if I did a select cut, it would benefit the property moving forward, because I want to make sure we get that early successional growth of vegetation, which is critical for producing food in your timber acres. That's something that's a huge passion of mine. There's a ton of timber down here on this property. I want to make sure that those are also providing for wildlife. Finally, I'm going to talk about memories. You know, that's something that is critical for everything we do in the outdoors, is making memories, whether it's spending time in the tree stand, spending time down here with friends. You know, down here is such a stress reliever for me. I'm spending so much time working, but the memories I'm making down here is the outdoor therapy, and be able to carry those with me, you know, for the rest of my life. That's what's truly important when it comes to spending time in the outdoors. And I've already checked off a few chapters already, and I'm looking forward to continue to write those in the coming weeks and months. As we finish up for today, we've talked about the how, we've talked about the why, we've talked about the financials a little bit, how this all came together, my plans for year one, what the future plans are going to look like, and I know that we've covered a ton today, so if you guys have any comments or questions on what this can look like, anything that I can help you through your process too, please don't hesitate to leave those. We enjoy going through the process of answering all those. I'm truly excited about the opportunity that I have down here on the homestead. This is something that I'm going to really enjoy bringing to you guys through the lens, spending time down here, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. And as always, thank you for joining us here on Midwest Whitetail.